Hi everybody. So I wanted to talk today about the concept of training volume, what it is, how much of it is too much, how much of it is too little, what's the right amount, etc. And to talk about in particular how training volume is the best way to measure the amount of work that you are doing in your workouts, and then you can use that to then ensure that you're doing the appropriate amount of work so that you are always continuing to see results, continuing to see gains for years and years and years, decades, however long you want to, without stagnating. Most of the time, if you're training stalls, it is for one of two primary reasons. The first one is simply that you are not doing enough training volume, or you are not increasing training volume over time the way you should be. The end result is that your workouts are basically staying the exact same. You are not increasing the difficulty. Everything is just getting easier and easier over time, and you are simply not going to see results from that. Conversely, the other option is simply that you are doing way too much training volume. You are trying to do too much too quickly, and the end result is that your workouts feel like crap. You kind of dread going into the gym. Everything feels way too hard or too tough, and as a result, your recovery can't keep up with the amount of volume that you are doing, and you see suboptimal results as well. So when you are not seeing the results that you want, it's often a very simple question of, okay, am I doing too much or too little? And therefore, do I need to do more or less in order to ensure that I am continuing to see good results? So I wanted to talk a little bit today about specifically what training volume is, how you can measure it, how you can make sure that you're doing the right amount of volume, and so on. Of course, a lot of the common misconceptions and misunderstandings that I hear about volume used to manage your training. So as always, don't forget to hit that like button so we can upgrade the channel, and I will continue. Training volume is traditionally defined as sets times reps times weight, which gives us a total amount of poundage lifted per exercise per workout. Now, I like to simplify this a little bit because at the end of the day, most of us don't do the exact same number of reps on every single exercise, on every single set of the exercise that we do. And so I like to simplify this as simply weight times total number of reps performed, because that just makes everything easier. This is going to give you a total number of pounds that you lifted. This initially seems like it would be a pretty good metric because now you've got an exact number in terms of how much effort that you did, how much total poundage you lifted, and you think, okay, that's pretty objective, that's pretty awesome. We can now use that to guide, okay, I should be doing more pounds the next workout and more pounds the workout after that, and so on. However, the problem is that this equation is actually not as good at comparing things as you would like it to be. So first of all, there is a factor in which you can very often cheat this equation by simply lowering the weight and doing more reps, because you can often do a disproportionate number of reps relative to weight. So for example, let's say that you can bench press 200 pounds, and that is your 1 rep max. So that means that you could do 200 pounds for 1 rep, and that is 1 set. And so that means that that set would be 1 times 200 pounds, which is a total of 200 pounds lifted. Now let's say that you drop down the weight a little bit. You go to 150 pounds, which is about 75% of your 1 rep max, and which accounts as something around your 10 rep max. So all of a sudden now you can do 10 reps in a single set. So 10 times 150 comes out to 1,500 pounds, which is 7.5 times as much as the amount that you could do on a single set with 200 pounds. So you can see here that you can now immediately do a lot more volume simply by dropping the weight. And that would imply that basically that this lighter set is 7.5 times as effective as that first set. However, it's not. It's just not the case. And further, you can continue taking this trend further. You can just go deeper and deeper into the endurance end of things and get more and more reps and more volume. And that's just not great. Ideally, what you kind of want out of this equation is something that you can use to compare, okay, all these different weights, all these different potential intensities and rep and set combinations that I can do, how am I going to compare them? How am I going to get sort of a unified system for determining, what's what, and sort of just, okay, what's the right amount of volume here? However, at the end of the day, because it's not good at comparing different intensities like that, that means that it's generally not a very good metric. It's also something that causes a lot of problems if you're trying to compare different exercises. So for example, when you take a front squat compared to a back squat, on a front squat you can only handle about 80% of what you can with a back squat. And then when you go with a low bar back squat, you can handle even a little bit more weight than you could with a standard high bar back squat. And so the end result is that if you looked at all of these, you might think that the low bar back squat is going to be best for building muscle because you can do the most weight with it, and therefore you can complete the highest amount of volume compared to something like the high bar back squat or the front squat. However, the reality is that all three of these exercises are going to be roughly equal in terms of building muscle mass, in terms of building strength, and you're simply going to want to select which one based on kind of what your training needs are, what your goals are, and so on. And so when you look at it, again, this equation would make you think that the front squat is an inferior exercise when it is not. In general, this calculation can be used sometimes. So for example, I like to say that if you are able to hold two of those three parts of the equation, so your sets or your reps or your weight steady, and you're able to increase on the third one, then that generally means that you're improving. So if, for example, you could do 3 times 10 with 135 pounds, and now you can do 3 times 10 with 145 pounds, you know that you've definitely improved because one variable has gone up, but the others have stayed the same. Likewise, if it was like, hey, I could do 3 times 10 with 135 pounds, and now I could do 3 times 12 with 135 pounds again, you know that you have improved. So it can be a meaningful, useful way to compare basically different sort of approaches when you're using the exact same weight or when you're using the exact same sets or reps, and you're just holding things steady and messing with just one variable at a time. But at the same time, it's, again, not great, not awesome. It has some limited use, but it's generally not the preferred method these days. So what is the preferred method these days? Well, interestingly, what research has started to show is essentially that so long as sets are taken to an appropriately challenging level, which is to say that you're near failure, you're doing nearly as many reps as you can per set, then basically, no matter what the weight on the bar is, no matter what the intensity, virtually all of these sets have roughly the same effect in terms of building muscle mass. So your 1 rep max with 200 pounds versus your 10 rep max with 150 pounds, both of those sets are going to provoke roughly the same stimulus. And in that case, it's like, okay, if those factors, if the weight doesn't matter, if the reps don't matter, so long as they're taken to near failure, all that matters is the number of sets. And so the volume calculation that people like to do today is simply the number of challenging sets per body part per week. Obviously, you don't want to do it on a daily basis because you cannot simply do more and more sets every single day. That doesn't work out. However, on a weekly basis, you can do something like say, hey, I was doing 14 sets for legs this week. I'm doing 15 sets for legs next week, 16 sets the week after that. And there you can see a very simple, very easy way of progressing that is also generally pretty accurate. Again, this is the preferred method with most coaches these days. It's just a really simple metric. It works really well. It gives you a way to compare all kinds of different work very simply and easily and effectively. And it's relatively objective without having to do all the math and all the confusing calculations that are involved in doing a traditional poundage total volume load calculation like the ones I mentioned above. So this is kind of the preferred way for tracking volume these days. Now, to get into the myths and misconceptions section. So the first one is basically that there are specific sort of levels of volume that you want to aim for that are going to be best for everybody. And I remember when I was starting out as a coach, everyone was worried a little bit too much about whether they would be doing way too much and be hitting this mythical state that they called overtraining. And so you would get all kinds of questions that were like, hey, if I do X amount of volume, is this overtraining? Or hey, if I do Y amount of volume, is this overtraining? And of course, the answer to that question is, how could I possibly know? Because I don't know what your entire training history looks like. I don't know what kind of training volume you're used to. I don't know what your body has adapted to. So basically, they've done a lot more research, and they've done research in which they compare folks who, for example, they gave them a low amount of volume. They had a group that they gave them a moderate amount of volume. They have a group that they gave them a high amount of volume. And then they had a group that they simply, basically increased their volume over the course of the study. And what you naturally find is that when you give someone a very specific level of volume, inevitably it's just not quite right. Either it is too much or it is too little, or maybe it is just right for the time, but then of course they're not adding volume over time, so they basically stagnate and stop growing. Conversely, if you give someone a low amount of volume and you start off and you basically just increase the amount of volume consistently over time, they get much better results, and that is what the study showed. And they got, of course, even better results than the folks who started off with the high amount of volume. You would think that, hey, if it was only about the amount of volume that you were doing, then the high amount of volume group would certainly win out because they were doing the most work. However, it's not about doing the most work. It is about doing a level of work that is appropriate for your current level of adaptation, for your body's current level of training history, what it is used to, and of course, again, building up slowly and steadily over time so that it can continue to adapt and continue to grow. This is why you can't simply copy the program of some other lifter that you've seen. If you see, for example, a world-class powerlifter who's like, this is how I train, it would be an awful idea for you to try and copy that program, because they train a specific way because they have been training for, years or decades or whatever the case is, and they have built up to a place where they are now at that level of volume where it is just right for them. And it's probably not going to be right for most of the other people on the planet because you don't have the exact same training history, genetic setup, and so on that they do. Another important one is that there doesn't seem to be any upper limit in terms of how much volume people can tolerate. And this is kind of something that needs to be understood clearly. Basically, the way that it used to be believed was that there was probably kind of an upper limit in terms of the amount of productive volume that you could accomplish, which is to say that, okay, you're doing more and more volume, and for a while, that's increasing the results that you're getting. But then you kind of hit a point where it's, every individual additional set stops really having much of a benefit and potentially even becomes a harm, where it's going to negatively impact your results in the long term simply because you are doing too much. And that was kind of the common sense wisdom. However, what the research has since shown is that there doesn't really seem to be any upper limit, which is to say that you continue to get results the more and more sets you add in per week indefinitely, as far as we can tell so far. That said, that again is not a recommendation that you should simply try and do as much volume as possible. It's a question of, okay, because there are diminishing returns, because every additional set does a little bit less than the previous sets that you did already, it means that every single additional set is going to become less and less efficient in terms of your time, and it becomes a question of, okay, do I want to spend all day in the gym? Is it worth it to me to do that just to squeeze out a few extra percentage points of results, and so on? And at the same time, there are plenty of people who get great results without having to spend all day in the gym, and in fact not spending a ton of time in the gym at all, and just kind of knowing how to intelligently work out, getting in, getting out, and moving on with their days. A common problem is that people rush it, they add volume way too quickly, they get too aggressive, and then it quickly gets to a point where they just can't handle it, everything is exhausting, it's taking over their life, and they just, get exhausted and burnt out, and they have to pull back. And so, saying, hey, there's not really an upper limit, it doesn't mean, hey, there's not some effective upper limit in terms of what you can tolerate, what you are going to decide, hey, is kind of the limit for me. Because again, not everyone wants to spend all day in the gym working out. That's just not how it is. Another important thing to understand is that volume doesn't go up linearly. It's not going to just increase, it's not like, hey, I did 3 sets this week, 4 sets next week, 5 the week after that, and then, within a couple of years, I'm doing hundreds of sets per week. Again, that's just way too aggressive. That's not how people actually train. The reality is, say, for example, that you are a bodybuilder, you're going to be doing as much volume as possible when you're bulking so that you can build as much muscle mass as possible. But then you go into a cut and you're probably going to have to cut down on your volume significantly because you simply don't have the energy levels that you had when you were bulking and you had a lot more free energy available. Likewise, when you're, say, a powerlifter, you have to prepare for a competition. And powerlifters can see a big boost in strength if they simply stop training for a little while as heavily. They enable their recovery to catch up and to maximize the amount that they are recovered, and then they can step on the platform basically at their peak form because they have taken some time to taper and deload and build into that and prepare for that competition. And so what they're going to do is they are going to intentionally start dropping volume over time as they get closer to a competition so that they can maximize their recovery and be as prepared as possible to step on that platform and hit a PR. Then, of course, there's just other things that will get in the way as well. Life happens, injury, job changes, moves, other major life events. Everything is going to impact your training, and that's going to impact basically how much you can handle. And that means that you're not going to just consistently add volume every single week over time. You're instead going to simply need to vary things normally, naturally, just based on things like your diet cycles, your intention for competition, and just kind of like the amount of time you have available in your life. Another important thing to understand is that maintenance volume is significantly lower than what we will call gaining or growing volume. So when you are trying to maintain a quality that you have built, it's actually significantly easier than building that quality in the first place. This may sound a little bit confusing, but basically what we've found is that it may take as little as a quarter to a third of the volume to maintain an quality that you have built, strength, muscle mass, endurance, etc., compared to actually building it or growing it in the first place. And so what that means is, if I was used to doing, say, 14 sets, 15 sets, 16 sets for bench press to build up my chest, then I could then drop back to something like 4 sets a week, which is probably just like one workout, as opposed to like 3 or 4. And now, all of a sudden, I'm able to maintain that for a pretty long period of time without any significant drop off, while basically just having a lot more free time and a lot more stuff to do. And so what this enables is that when you get to a certain professional level, when you get to a certain height, you can start doing things like specialized cycles where, hey, I'm going to focus on just my bench press and just kind of let everything stagnate and maintain for a little while, because that's just kind of what I'm planning on doing. People have focused on particular lifts, people have focused on particular goals, and they can just do a maintenance level of training for all of their other stuff, and it has basically no drawback, especially if it's, again, in the context of a longer training program where you're continuing to train, continue to build. And this also gives, I think, people, a much better understanding of why you can just afford to take time off periodically. Like, if you're just like, hey, I'm going to take this week off from training, I'm just going to do 1 or 2 workouts, and boom, you lost nothing as a result of that, and you had so much extra time to do other stuff with, then yeah, there's no reason not to do it. It helps you have a much better balance with the rest of your life to be able to take time off periodically and see that your results are not compromised by that in the long run. Another important factor is that volume works differently for strength than for muscle mass. So essentially, when you're training for muscle mass, the more volume, the better. And basically just you can keep adding volume and you just want to keep adding sets and so on. When it comes to strength, it matters a lot more about the intensity that you're using, which is to say, hey, you want to actually be using heavy weights, sufficiently heavy, greater than 70% of your 1 rep max or so. And after that first set, there's basically a greater drop off in terms of the additional results that you get from additional volume. And so what that means is that when you're talking about strength, it probably doesn't make sense to just think about adding a ton of sets over time. It probably makes sense to just focus on doing some bare minimum number of sets, building the amount of strength that you can or maintaining the amount of strength that you can, and then just focusing on building muscle mass with the rest of your workout, because that's going to help you see more strength in the long run when you build more muscle mass. So it's something where, strength in particular, it doesn't necessarily make sense to add volume in the exact same way that you would when you're looking to build muscle mass. It's just a slight subtle difference. And I would say, I've been that person who used to do programs where it was like, do 10 singles at 90% or whatever the case is, and those things were exhausting and I didn't really get much of a benefit out of them. And I think this explains why. It's just something where it's like, hey, you can do singles you can do 10 singles, but it's not necessarily going to be a useful way to work out or to build strength. And last major topic for today, I want to just talk about reminding folks that you need to progress things slowly and that you need to progress things in the context of the training week and not session to session. If you are trying to improve your volume every single training session, that's going to be exhausting. It's going to be way too much. And if you're trying to improve your volume from week to week even, that can be too much, particularly if you're taking too aggressive of an addition of volume from week to week. And so what does that mean? I tell people generally something like 2 to 5% per week in terms of the volume that you are completing is a good amount to add. At the same time, for, of course, beginners, you can handle a much greater, maybe 5 to 10% per week to start off with, simply because you're a beginner, gains are coming a lot quicker and so on. But as you get to be a more advanced lifter, you definitely need to fall down to something like 1%, 2% a week, very, very minimal increases over time, because otherwise, again, you're going to get to that point where you quickly hit a point where everything is just way too exhausting and it's way too much and you need to drop back. And when we're talking about total sets, 1%, it's like, okay, what is 1% when I'm going from 16 to 17 sets? 1% is significantly less than that difference. So you have to be very careful when it comes to adding volume over time. You can't be too aggressive. You have to be as slow as possible, because even 1% can very quickly add up over time when you are multiplying that over weeks and weeks and weeks, over years and years and years. I have taken a very slow approach in my own training. I typically progress at a rate of just 2% per week, and even that is very aggressive to me sometimes. And I have been training for, at this point, over 14 years, so I have a lot of experience, and I know very much that I have to take things very slowly. I cannot continue to train the way that I used to when I was a beginner, and I would just try and add weight to the bar every single week in really massive numbers. So you have to take things very slowly, and you have to take things in the context of a training week or even in a training month, as opposed to a training workout every single session. Just a little bit of warning, think in the long term, it's going to save you a lot of heartache, it's going to save you a lot of wasted training, and it is going to help you ensure that you are seeing optimal results for the long run. So hopefully this has cleared up a little bit in terms of understanding volume, understanding how you can use it to guide your training. Hopefully you can use this to make long-term gains and not run into plateaus and frustrating walls and so on like I did, like everybody does when they are a beginner, simply because they are either too aggressive or not aggressive enough and they don't have the right context in terms of, okay, where should I actually be effectively adding training volume? Where should I actually effectively be doing more? As opposed to just kind of, okay, I'm just going to show up and try and slap on difficulty here or there wherever I feel like it, and I'm just going to try and add as aggressively as I feel like. And of course, then you just hit a wall very quickly. So hopefully this has helped you. As always, if you like the video, don't hesitate to comment, subscribe, tell me what you want to see in future videos. I am taking on new clients. So if you're interested in having a coach to help you out, setting up a program for yourself, let me know. I will put the link down below in the description and you can apply to be a client. As always, have a great week and I will talk to you all next week. Bye.